Hello, Yakri here with another Artifact video, or more of a general card game video, but it's focused on Artifact because that's what I'm playing right now, and that's where I'm seeing a lot of sort of people newer to the card game genre who are confused by some card balance decisions, some of which are confusing to me too, others of which are pretty easily explained by understanding how card games are typically balanced and how they're constructed, right? Excuse me. So let's get into this. There are kind of four sorts of cards you typically see in a card game set, right? You have good cards, experimental cards, draft cards, and chaff cards. Good cards, very simply, are the cards that are intended to actually be powerful and useful if you had the choice of what cards to play, right? Like in Constructed. Experimental cards are meant to be interesting, and who the fuck cares if they're powerful? They try to balance them, but they could be overpowered, they could be underpowered. It's hard to say because they rely on more complicated interactions typically and more complicated mechanics, and so the developers can't be like 100% confident that some emergent gameplay won't come out that results in them sucking or being very powerful. Draft cards are designed a little bit differently than good cards, but they're kind of in the same category. They're meant to be good in draft, where you're opening packs and you're selecting cards out of those packs to build a deck on the fly. And they're meant to be more good in the like sub meta that develops in that context, right? Games are typically a bit slower. There's not as much removal. Clear counters don't exist, so cards with kind of specific counters become better when they wouldn't be good and constructed. And so this allows the developers to make some kind of different cards that might be overpowered if they didn't have some glaring weakness that are interesting in draft and then not hugely influencing the constructed meta necessarily, right? Okay, so then you also have chaff cards, which these in part I think exist for draft and they exist for market reasons, right? So, excuse me, a lot of people seem to confuse this and say that, oh, they're just there for draft reasons, or flip the other way and say that they only exist so the devs can make more money. I guess in a game without draft, that would be 100% true. However, since draft does exist, something that you need to realize about draft is that making the best of bad choices is a part of drafting, and you have to have bad choices in order to make the best of them, right? And this is what leads to interesting drafts, both for you to play through and for you to play against and for you to watch in tournaments. And so maybe not all of the chaff cards have value in this sense, but a lot of them do. Let's just go through these really quick and get into a little more detail. I mean, I guess I kind of covered it all already on my main screen. But I made these nice PowerPoint slides. It would be a shame to waste them, right? So yeah, good cards, they might be good, they might not be good. I think some cards that are good are intended to be good only in the context of a full rotation, and the devs are concerned that if they were good in the context of just the set that they come in alone, they would be overpowered. Excuse me, man, I don't have to edit this video a lot. All right. Yeah, they're concerned that they would be overpowered in that context. A good example would be Rix. He's a pretty bad card right now, but we can't be sure that he won't become powerful in a year when Artifact has a full set rotation because of his passive, right? He comes back every turn. If there are more cards or more equipments that are very good that you could abuse this with, he'll become a really good card. For example, Races of Sacrifice, you can already do kind of an aggressive strategy with Rix that's like okay. It's not great, but it's doable, and it's not bad even. He's perhaps a little underrated. And the thing is that imagine if Bracers of Sacrifice was an AoE and just like blew up a lane, right? It's like a reusable board wipe. That would be insanely overpowered. Obviously it's not, because even on a regular hero that'd be a bit too strong. But we could see some card like that in the future that the devs don't intend to be so powerful, but on Rix he can kind of exploit it by coming back to life every turn. And we'll see. Maybe it won't happen, but it could. And that's probably why he has the stat block he has, and why his silence ability is a little weak. Additionally, it can silence creeps, which Draw Ranger can't do. And it's possible that this could be a very valuable counter against some future meta deck. And again, this might not happen, but I think people are overlooking the fact that cards exist so that they can potentially be used in a meta that doesn't exist yet, okay? All right, so did I miss anything here? All right, experimental cards. I don't know if I have a good example of an experimental card. an artifact to point to, because I can't be sure that cards are experimental as much. But anything with wacky, fun, interesting effects that could be good in casual play and might be good in constructed or might be ass, or same thing for draft. That's experimental cards. So some cards are going to be kind of wonky, and some of them will end up being powerhouses, and some of them will end up being trash, and that's just kind of going to happen if you go a little nuts with experimenting in card sets. And it's something that card games kind of do because they have room to do it, right? You have all these cards in a set. They don't all have to be good. So having some experimental cards can be fine. And especially if their effect is at least interesting, then they're fine for casual play. And I don't think there's necessarily a problem with cards existing for casual play and meme decks and that kind of thing, right? So draft cards. Already talked about this a bit, but these are your good cards again, and they're just going to be good in a different context, right? Stuff that might be bad and constructed because it's too easy to counter, because it's not fast enough, it's not aggressive enough, it doesn't benefit enough from a tight knit strategy. These can be draft cards instead. And typically there's a lot less stuff like board wipes and removal in draft, because your opponent just doesn't get to pick that much of it typically. So a lot of cards can be more valuable to you in draft than usual. And chaff cards. These are your bad cards. And the thing about chaff cards, of course, is that designing a bad card is pretty easy. You might not know if a good card is really going to actually see a lot of use and can say constructed, but bad cards are probably going to just be bad. It's pretty hard to fuck up and make a bad card good. So yeah, you can be pretty you can be confident that they're actually going to be bad. And they exist to reduce the value of packs and also to make drafting more interesting. And so they're kind of the bane of constructed players, right? You'd rather, if you're a constructed player, these not exist. If you're a draft player, you might not like them, but from a game designer perspective, they present an important role. I guess you could say ideally maybe we'd have only experimental cards instead to fill out the chaff role, right? And all our chaff cards would be weird and interesting, but I don't know if that works out well from a balance perspective. It probably, obviously the experimental cards could vary in power pretty wildly, and so it makes things a little too unreliable when you're drafting, right? So you want a good balance between chaff and good cards. And that pretty much sums it up, right? Those are the 4 kind of card archetypes from a balance perspective that you're going to see in card games. This is pretty well adhered to in Magic the Gathering, I think. But Magic the Gathering, point out, has a much lower emphasis on draft, much lower. Artifact, I believe, is primarily designed for draft. Constructed plays second string. It's still, of course, intended to be a fun constructed game. And personally, I've now played a little constructed. I started off playing only draft. I played a little constructed, and it is very fun. And I think it'll be pretty good in the future when we have more sets, and so there's a little more variety. But I think the game definitely is designed with draft in mind first, and because of that, it doesn't necessarily feel great for constructed right now, because there's so much draft like centric stuff in the game. Yeah, that sums it up. And so if you were wondering like, oh, why do the devs include some of these bad cards? They're so obviously bad. They could have just rebalanced them. Well, they don't want to rebalance them. Either these cards are intended for draft, and they're supposed to be best of a bad type decision, like the chaff cards might be in draft, or they could even be intended for draft in the sense that they just aren't good regularly, but maybe you can make them work in draft, right? And they could fit more into a draft or experimental card role. And the ones that are blatantly good are meant to be blatantly good. And in fact, something else to keep in mind, more sets are coming. A lot of people seem to overlook the fact that sets and rotations in card games are huge balance patches, right? When you add a new set, that's a balance patch. It's going to affect significantly the balance of the overall game and the value, the power level of previous cards, right? Because if counters come in, cards go down in value. Even stuff like, for example, Drow Ranger, one of the reasons she's so good is because she's 1 HP higher than the damage of at any cost. If for some reason Valve prints a bunch of cheap like 3 or 4 mana 7 damage board clears that are just better at any cost, Drow goes down in value because now she dies to the cheap board clear option, right? And there's a lot of similar stuff like that in terms of like hero stat blocks, right? All the hero stat blocks are like carefully calibrated for balance purposes, and so that and that tends to lead to certain heroes being considered good in part because of stuff like they have 1 more HP, and 1 more HP puts them out of kill range for this whole group of other heroes, and that's very valuable, right? Like having 8 HP range means like who kills you? It's like just Bristle PA, Lucky Bounty Hunter, Debbie, and Legion Commander kill you if you have 8 HP, right? And if you have 7 HP, like this whole other pile of heroes starts killing you. Okay, I think Debbie goes up to 8 with her ability, right? She's at like 7 normally, goes up to 9. Yeah, anyway, point is, balance is kind of a delicate thing, and adding counters to the system, or adding new types of heroes to the system that have different types of stats could change that equation a lot. If your higher HP that your hero has, that your hero is balanced around, or so a hero, sorry, is balanced around, if that gets devalued, then the power of the card decreases, because power is relative in video games, right? Maybe it's relative in real life too, I guess, but especially video games. So keep that in mind, and yeah, we'll see you around next time. Yakri out.